everyone to Tipping in 2026. We'll just give it another minute or two before we actually get started. While we're waiting, we'd love to hear where everyone is joining us today. Please pop in some state or province into the live chat. I'll start. I'm here joining from Kelowna, British Columbia. Amazing. We have people joining from Calgary, Toronto, nice. Alaska, beautiful. Some from PA. Edmonton, nice. Dallas, Texas. Beautiful, beautiful. Looks like we have a great mix of Canadian and US attendees today, which is perfect for this conversation. Wait, I'm gonna give it another second before we get started. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Please continue adding your location to the chat as you join. But it looks like we've got a great group, so let's get started. I'll quickly cover some housekeeping notes before, of course, we get started. Number one, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A window at any point during the session. We'll save time at the end to address them, as many as we can, of course. Today's session is also being recorded, and the full playback link will be sent to all registrants tomorrow. So if you missed anything or want to revisit part of the conversation, you'll be able to come back and rewatch it. Finally, keep an eye out throughout the webinar. We'll be sharing helpful resources if relevant content becomes part of the discussion. All right, now let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Cindy LeClair. I'll be moderating today's conversation on the changing tipping landscape across Canada and the United States. A little bit about me. I'm a solutions consultant at Push Operations, where I work with restaurant operators, sales teams to navigate workforce management, payroll, and other operational changes facing the hospitality industry. I'm really excited about today's conversation and to learn alongside of all of you. I'm joined today also by three fantastic panelists. But rather than me having to introduce them, I'm going to let each one of them tell you a little bit about themselves and the perspective they're bringing to the conversation today. Patrick, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, your organization, and your systems?
Hello, thank you, Cindy. My name is Patrick Yearout. I work for a company called Ivar's Restaurants. We're headquartered in Seattle. Ivar's is a seafood concept, and we operate both full service and quick service seafood restaurants around the Puget Sound area. We also have a sports and entertainment division. We operate stands at local sports stadiums, and we have a manufacturing plant that makes chowder and soups, not only for our restaurants, but we sell to other restaurants and grocery stores and Costco and things like that. So we do a little bit of everything when it comes to food service and the food service industry. My role is I'm the Director of Innovation, which is just a fancy way of saying I do a lot of different things, recruiting, training. I partner with HR a lot. I partner with marketing. I partner with IT. So just whatever the day brings.
Nice. Thank you, Patrick. Lukas, let's head over to you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do in your organization and your system.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Cindy. So my name is Lukas Bochno. I am the Director of People Programs and Governance for the Canadian Brewhouse Group. So many folks may recognize the restaurants. We have the Canadian Brewhouse, banquets, PGA, but we also have some other sides to our business. We have Plant Life Cannabis out in Alberta. We have Ribeye Butchers and a couple other titles under our banner, and that gives us some good insights on both the hospitality and the retail sides here. So as far as our systems go, it's we are push operations users through and through. And on the tip side, it's a bit of a more proprietary solution, so can't go too far in there.
No worries, no worries. Thanks, Lukas. And finally, Kirk, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, your organization?
Sure, and happy to, Cindy. Thank you very much. So, Kirk Grogan, COO and one of the co-founders over here at TipHaus. Our tech stack, similar to Lukas, is actually proprietary as well, but obviously because we serve to solve the tip dilemma in the restaurant space and hospitality industry. We are the largest and most comprehensive tip solution. So end to end, we manage it from the moment that guest leaves the tip all the way through the reporting, the compliance, payroll, until it hits that employee's bank account. We work with several FDIC insured banks here in the US to offer real-time or near real-time payments of that tips, and currently doing about $5 billion a year in tip allocation, making sure every penny that comes in as a tip for these hard workers in the restaurant industry exits as a tip to them with transparency and timeliness.
Wow, amazing. Well, thank you all for being here. We have a great combination of real operator experience, market insight, and industry data represented today. But before we jump in, just a quick note for everyone attending. Again, please feel free to submit your questions during, using the live chat throughout the webinar. We'll do our very best to work them into the conversation and address them towards the end. So Kirk, I have a few questions for you to start off. From TipHaus data across thousands of locations, what's the headline on how tipping is actually shifting in 2026? And where are Canada and the US diverging most sharply?
Yeah, that's a great question, Cindy. I appreciate it. So the headlines, there's not a simple answer for the headlines. There's a lot of things converging to make this happen, but I can paint that image a little bit. So the US side of it, the biggest change is recent policies and legislations. This is OBBA. It's what's going on that front and how tipping, particularly voluntary tipping, matters more now than ever. There's tax deductions. There's lots of fun things to discuss there. Canada doesn't have the legislation lever that just occurred. It did not pass a massive reform sweeping over what tax liabilities occur on it, but it does have a number of small levers that are impacting it. And that's going to be, most notably, you're seeing some tip fatigue. You're seeing tip fairness, making sure we're getting it to the right people. And for operators, always the ability to stay compliant. So that's direct versus controlled tips. That's the tax implications within each. And even the length of time operators are holding on to those employee tips, that's falling under compliance standpoints. In the US, those don't apply. That's only for employee satisfaction as to how quick they're able to access their tips. But in general, like if I really had to zoom out and look at it, I spent 12 years up in Seattle. I'm very familiar with Patrick and Ivar's and a big supporter of their group with it. But I also traveled, BC and Eastern provinces as well. And they're still quite similar. There may be some legislation changes, but like tips and service are a critical component. It's still very much a balancing act that we're always trying to get right. And you're wanting to make sure that, the staff feels fairly compensated, that the guests control the quality of their service, or at least the perception that they have some control over whether or not these servers and bartenders really like to take care of them. And we're making sure that we give transparency. So those are the major pieces. Lots of little divergences, but in the end, very, very, very similar here, Cindy.
Absolutely. And what's the most common mistake you see operators making right now because they're reacting to old rules?
Because they're honest, easiest answer is the question is the answer there. The biggest mistake is that they are reacting to old rules. I think with it, again, so from the US standpoint, OBBBA was a massive change, but there are still there's a lot of unspoken customs. There's a lot of needs in the industry. So when I think about OBBBA, and for those who don't know, it's the tax deduction ability for servers on voluntary tips we can dive into. But really, the big change there was you needed to react to it before that change occurred. There were W-2 adjustments that needed to be made. You needed to be able to make sure you can accumulate and account for voluntary tips versus service charges, making sure employees are able to take care of that $25,000 tax deduction and their liabilities that they see. But a lot of it as well is not driven around legislation changes. It's driven around market forces. So I see a lot of operators still that don't understand we are all competing with the gig economy. Just candidly, it is something that has continued to chip away. We're in an industry that has unbelievably high turnover. And so we have to react and we have to get ahead of it. So tip policies not being adjusted, not paying attention to your tip sharing, your tip pooling policies, really making sure that we're understanding how these tip policies impact the position, the customer, the employee, what service is being provided. And again, like I think I see so many groups that, hey, this was working 5 years ago. It worked for my, the manager before my previous manager. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to rock the boat. But the boat's been rocked, right? Everyone can take a gig economy app in their phone right now in their pocket. They can take a task grab in an Uber, a Lyft. They can go grab money quickly. And if we're not paying attention to how much they can earn, what level of service you're requiring them at the restaurant, did you swap out old jobs for something that they've subsidized since? Did you get rid of a host? Did you get rid of a food runner? You always want to be auditing how much of your tips are going where. People who are reacting after you've lost the employees is a little late to get on that, but that would be the number one piece, is reacting to something that's already changed as opposed to seeing it coming.
Great. That's great. Just jumping into really the next one, and it's really just for both Patrick and Lukas. What's actually changed in the last year and how you manage or think about tipping in your market? Maybe we can start with Patrick.
Well, at Ivar's, we haven't made any real structural changes to tipping in the last year. Our employees share tips. We have tip pooling, and those earnings have been distributed through regular payroll for quite a long time now. I think what has changed, and Kirk brought this up, was the amount of attention that's being paid to tipping. You have the whole tip fatigue conversation that is happening with guests. You have the federal tax changes that are going on here in the US. And you hear a lot, or at least I hear a lot from my colleagues in the industry, about different ways that companies can distribute tips, or just, different tipping models that they want to try out. So there's just a lot more talking or conversations about tipping. So for us, I wouldn't say that the system has changed so much as the environment around us has changed. It has caused us to pay more attention to whether our process, is fair and accurate and understandable. So we've been having conversations with our employees about that and making sure that they feel that it is fair and understandable and accurate. So that's kind of where we've been over the last year. And to answer your question from before that I missed the first time around, we are a TipHaus user. That is what we use for our tips. We've been using them for several years now. We also use Toast. That is our POS. And then for our payroll, we use Paylocity.
Nice. And I'd love to know your perspective on this as well, Lukas.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as our changes go, this past year has been a pretty big one for us. We did have an entire system change as a result of an unexpected shift in our provider. And it definitely took us down an entire path of seeing just really what matters to the employees when it comes to how tips are handled. And we work on a direct model in our business. And when it came down to seeing what people want to know from their tip systems and how things function, it really kept coming back to the same point. It was, when am I going to see these tips? And as if I had to really say the biggest learning that came out of this entire shift, it was people want to see speed. Transparency is an important part of it, but at the end of the day, it's something that many people depend on. It's what makes or breaks some of their weeks. It's am I paying the bill? Am I waiting to see what happens? So really, I think the biggest change has been understanding that if you have to prioritize something, you prioritize speed. And that's what you have to look at when you're talking to providers and different platform integrators and whatnot. So that's a big one.
Absolutely. And how have changing wage and labor laws shaped your approach to tipping? Where do you see your country heading next? I'll give that one to Lukas first.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm going to say that, wages are, it is what it is with the way we approach it. We follow what every province decides to move with and adjust accordingly. We try and make sure that our front lines are getting relative adjustments. So if it hits the front, we'll bump up another level too to make sure that everyone feels like they're rising tide raises all ships kind of thing. But as from the legislative front, I mean, that's really where you start to get into some pretty murky waters. Not to pick on the Ontario folks out there. I love your province, but there's probably been at least a new bill amendment or a sense statement submitted since this webinar started. It's the rules are constantly shifting, and I mean, it really just comes down to subscribe to every sort of submission, law firm, anything out there that can actually send you these updates so you can keep on top of it and ideally get ahead of it. Like Kirk mentioned, it's just a lot of people are just getting lost in it, or they don't actually address it till after the fact. But I think it's just making sure that people subscribe to the information and try and be proactive. That's really all you can do, because it's constantly shifting. Tons of it happening out in Ontario for us. I guess where do you see the country heading next? Typically, when it comes to Canada, if it hits Ontario and it hits BC, it'll start to trickle to other provinces. It'll then make its way over probably, Saskatchewan and then maybe Manitoba, and now picking on my own province, but typically coming in last, we have Alberta. But it's one of those things where if you see it on the horizon, you should probably start getting ready for it. And if you're going to apply the rules, it makes the most sense to just kind of go across the board.
Absolutely. Being proactive is key in this for sure. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on this as well?
Well, Washington State is a very different environment from a lot of the rest of the country here, because we don't have a tip credit in Washington State. Employees have to receive their full applicable minimum wage before tips. So in Washington State, outside of some of the bigger cities, the minimum wage is $17.13 an hour. And here in Seattle, it's $21.30 an hour. And so tips are on top of that. They aren't something that we can use to meet that wage requirement. And I think that matters when you're talking about tip sharing or tip pooling. The guest experience involves a lot more than just the person who is right in front of you taking your order or serving the table. You have cooks, you have bussers, food runners, and a lot of other hourly employees who are all contributing to that dining experience, making it a great dining experience. And because everyone is already starting from that minimum wage floor, we can look at tips as an additional pool of compensation to recognize the broader team. So do I think that the country is headed in that direction? Parts of it are. Other states have also removed the tip credit, not very quickly, and it's certainly not happening uniformly. The federal system still allows for a minimum wage of $2.13 an hour, as long as the tipped employee makes up the rest of it. It's somewhere in the $7 range with tips. So yes, there can be an enormous difference depending on where you operate. And that's just happens, we're in Washington State, and that's the rules of our state. But I think it makes our, because of the way that our wages are structured, it helps with the tip pooling, definitely.
Absolutely. So what would you say is the single biggest regulatory tax or wage change forcing you to rethink tips or service charges right now? And how are you responding? I'm going to start off with Patrick.
you're starting with me again?
Sorry, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
Well, for us, it was probably the federal no tax on tips provision, mainly because it created a lot of questions for employees. The name of it makes it sound a lot simpler than it actually is. As Kirk was saying, it's a federal income tax deduction for qualifying tips, and it's not something that suddenly makes tip income disappear from payroll. We still run all of our tips through payroll, and those tips have to be tracked and they have to be reported, and Social Security comes out of it, and Medicare taxes still come out of it, and everything still applies. So it's not the magical wish I think that a lot of people thought it was. So it hasn't caused us to think or rethink, whether or how we are distributing the money, but it has definitely reinforced the importance of keeping good records for us, because our employees have a lot of questions about how the process works and what's going to change. And it also changed our communication. We have to make sure that we're supplying them with the right information about this new provision, I guess you would call it, or law. And we have to be very careful about that, because we can't give them tax advice, because that's not what we do. We can just sort of point them in the right direction and say, go look over here. So it came with a learning curve for our employees. It came with a learning curve for us. And I think as people start getting their tax returns, there's going to be a learning curve there as well. So I think that definitely has been the biggest thing that we've been dealing with over the past year.
Absolutely. Lukas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick on again single regulatory change, again, I'll love to Ontario. I'm going to say it's going to probably be one of the big ones was the Working for Workers Act amendments. There's been a lot of changes with regards to requirements around how any electronic tip platforms handle payments. So it's making sure there's no fees associated with deposits, and mandatory documentation policies, things shared in the workplace. And it's from our side, it's mostly making sure that our providers are keeping in line with these requirements, and that we have the paperwork on our end to kind of back that up if push comes to shove. But it really is just making sure that that your providers are capable of matching the legislation changes. And as for how we respond, we make sure that when dealing with our system providers, we check how the system's operating, and we go for kind of the best common denominator to make sure that you're checking all the boxes, from Saskatchewan variances on tip pooling or regulations to Ontario to BC, and you kind of make sure that you're hitting all the boxes nationwide, and that just puts you in a much safer place. It might mean that, hey, now someone in Alberta is being held to a much higher standard, but at the end of the day, it's really only benefiting the employees. So it's no harm in that if you're making someone's experience better, even if you don't have to.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's a lot of auditing and just at the end of the day, just being proactive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my question here is for Kirk. Can you break down OBBA in plain terms? So what changed on service charges, and why are U.S. operators who moved away from tipping now reversing course?
Yeah, happy to. It's a lot of B's in that OBBBA, but yes. And as Patrick called out, colloquially, particularly for the industry, it's no tax on tips. As he also called out, that's a great political slogan. It's not good advice to follow when you're looking at how this works, because there is Medicare and FICA taxes and things like that. Even state taxes still apply if they didn't conform. So lots and lots of new things to study, unfortunately. with it, real simple. I know we got a lot of Canadian operators, so I'll keep it very short and simple for the US ones. Running 2025 through 2028, you are allowed, employees, I should say, are allowed to deduct up to $25,000 in tax deductibles from tip earnings. So up to $25,000, there's no federal tax paid on that. Federal tax still has an asterisk there, of course, as we just mentioned. It also applies to overtime earnings, $12,500 on just the 0.5. So if you're earning 1.5x for overtime, it's just that 0.5x multiplier. And it is only for voluntary tips. So Cindy, your question there is like, how does that impact service charges is the right question to start thinking about it. Service charges don't qualify for the deduction. We have already seen a number of operators pulling back. They had rolled out service charges largely across the restaurant, not just for large parties potentially, but for all service. Problem is there, your employees, there's between $1,000 and $3,000 most likely hitting their pocket less if you're doing that because they don't qualify for those deductions. Why are they leaving these service charges? That's part of it. I would also say that, candidly, employees, they don't receive a tax benefit, but restaurants have been ditching this for a while because employees haven't always loved the service charge model. Without naming names, there was a very famous restaurant group, 2020, 2021 timeline, got a lot of press and went out and said, hey, we're getting rid of tipping. We're removing this from the stores. We want to make service charges more equitable for our entire staff. They had a lot of great ideas, and I do truly believe they had good intentions with it. The unfortunate reality is the best employees made significantly less money. They felt it was a little less unequitable, a little less fair for them. And so within 2 years, they had to revert. They'd lost 75% of their tenured staff. And despite them going on talk shows and doing a massive press tour about getting rid of tips, they never reversed that on the way back around. They led a lot of restaurants down that same kind of path. You say, why do you know this, Kirk? Because they're a TipHaus customer of ours. We handle their tips now. They've switched. So, it's something that a lot of groups have to pay attention to. I don't think, and I would say this applies equally well to Canada. Number of studies have consistently shown the perception of the guest, whether real or perceived, is that they have control over the service and whether or not they have a great experience at a restaurant. They have a greater sense of control if they have a tip left after them, right? A service charge where it's an auto deduction, it's just a fee added. It doesn't matter if my server checks on me 10 times or once, that's still coming out. And so with it, you want your guests to feel like they have control, and you also want your best employees to feel like they can go above and beyond to get higher tips. Very, very important piece in the service industry. That's not to say there's never a time for service charges. I think they still have their role every now and then, but kind of the carte blanche method that we have seen where a few restaurant groups try to get onto, by and large, they have pulled back heavily because you realized your top tip earners can go to the restaurant down the street and earn significantly more if they are still accepting tips. They can go gamble and say, hey, I can earn 22, 23, 24% instead of maybe the 15.5 or 18% that you're going to auto grab to it. And of course, service charges, the appeal to restaurants, those are now wages. So you get to control that slightly different than how you would with tips. So they can be used towards healthcare costs. They can do a number of different items. But it's a major shift, and you're seeing the restaurant industry start sliding back towards the tips. In the US, of course, OBBBA puts a very stamp of approval reason to go back. In Canada, I think you're just going to continue to see the mix of do guest pull back on service charges. If they're still spending the same amount, but they feel like they gave up that sense of control over their dining experience, not always the ideal one.
Absolutely. And with minimum wage shifting across states and provinces, what should a multi-market operator be auditing in their tip structure today to avoid any expensive mistake?
Is that for me as well, Cindy?
Yes, Kirk. Sorry, that's for you.
No problem. Yeah, that's a great question. Audited regularly. So from a legal standpoint, tip credit exposure, Patrick covered this well there. Several states and even some cities do or do not allow tip credits, right? So you have to monitor that by your local jurisdiction. Can you take that? Can you not? Canada, of course, has no tip credit. They are always required to meet minimum wage. But Canada, the provinces, as Lukas has alluded to, each one changes on their own. You have to monitor controlled versus direct. You have to understand timelines to get it out of your account. Lukas mentioned the US, I think accuracy and transparency is more important. And Canada, I think timeliness is more important. They're really looking at it from that standpoint. And if operators aren't paying attention to that, there's a risk with employees, frustrations, turnover, whatever it may be. There's also a lot of this legal gray area where even if the government isn't cracking down on it, they technically can. You need to get those funds out of your operating account. They should not be mingling with the business's operating expenses. Both countries are really paying a lot of attention to non-tipped duty time. So, hey, you're a tipped employee, but you spend 50% of your time rolling silverware, sweeping the floors, whatever it may be. Groups are cracking down on that pretty good and looking at that. Card processing in the U.S. is a big one. Whether or not you're allowed to deduct credit cards, the merchant processing fee from the tips. California doesn't allow that. Several states don't. I think many of the provinces in Canada have already outright banned that, and several of them are kind of moving towards that. It's at minimum frowned upon, if not outright wrong. But, I think both Lukas and Patrick kind of touch really heavily. Audit and transparency, keeping clean records. So in the US, when we're looking at service charges versus tips, you don't just get to say internally, hey guys, we got rid of service charges, it's now tips. If anywhere on your menu in small fine print, it talks about service charges, you've got yourself a discrepancy that is right for legal. You always want to be very, very clear on what it's looking like. And then from non-legal, it's just to make sure you're filling the needs of your employees. Again, if you've eliminated the position like a food runner, tips need to be rethought. If your host and hostesses, if their roles have evolved over the last few years, if they're doing more, if they're doing takeout or whatever it may be, you may need to rethink your tip policy. So plenty from a legal standpoint, and also plenty from a healthy business standpoint, I'd say, Cindy.
Absolutely. All right, this next question goes out to Lukas and Patrick. We're going to start off with you, Lukas. Are you feeling tip fatigue from guests? How does it show up day to day, and how have you changed anything about how or when you present the tip prompt?
Yeah, sure. So I will say that this definitely comes down to a difference in industries. So on the hospitality front, it's almost an expectation. People they're not really alarmed when they get that prompt at the end of their meal. It's fairly accepting. People might be a little hesitant at some point, but as a whole, we haven't noticed that there's been a drastic change. The number of people coming in are still pretty consistent. The spends are consistent. People aren't getting frustrated. They're still providing the tips and whatnot because they come in, they have an experience, and they understand that it's the experience that they're providing that tip for. But if I shift that over to the retail front, for example, now when you suddenly have someone come in for what they perceive to be a transactional experience and they get to the till and are met with that tip prompt, they're like, well, what are we doing here? I picked up a steak. I'm going to be the one cooking it. So that's where we've been met with a little bit more frustration, confusion, anger, people calling the office to see who do I talk to about this? And really on that front, it definitely is more of a justification where you try and say that to an extent there is an experience in our retail where we're trying to hold it to a higher standard. We're doing more than just the transaction. We're trying to provide people with you're great. You're coming in to buy a couple steaks. We're going to provide you with a whole meal plan to go along with that. We're going to recommend how you pair this, what it goes with, what some great seasonal options are. Or you come in not knowing anything, and the person across the counter walks around. They walk you through the gallery of meats and assorted goods that you can purchase to make that dinner party and whatnot. And when they're presented with that request for tips, again, it's where us as operators have to kind of look at it okay, does it make sense that we're asking for a percentage? No, maybe not. So that's where we might adjust our approach to say, you know what, this is going to be a flat number, and that's more of what we go for. It's going to be a little bit more static, 1, 3, 5, 10 kind of exceptional thing. And we never ask for it as an expectation. It might be something that we more often bring up if we're doing something like preparing a very large catering order. And that's where people definitely feel a lot more accepting of that prompt on the retail front. So because a lot of effort went above and beyond to preparing that takeaway versus, I'm in the door, I'm out in 5 minutes. People might pass, they'll often pass. And we don't ever want to pressure people into doing that. And we give them that option. So Yeah, that's how we're feeling it.
That is a great answer. Patrick, over to you. Same question.
Well, I knew we were going to talk about this topic, so I did look up some numbers. We get a lot of online guest surveys. We've been soliciting online guest surveys for 21 years now, and I look up for the past 2 years, and we've gotten about 18,000 guest surveys across our restaurants for the last 2 years. And so I did a search for ones about tipping, and some of them were just mentioned that they left a tip. But in terms of surveys where they mentioned that they didn't feel tipping was appropriate, there were only 3 out of the 18,000. So it didn't feel to me like, a lot of comments about tip fatigue were coming from our guests. In fact, this last few weeks, or just, I guess, last month, when we had the World Cup games here in Seattle, our quick service restaurant downtown got the highest tips they've ever gotten before. So we're not feeling the tip fatigue here necessarily. And I should add that our full service restaurants, our guests are very familiar with the concept of tipping. We've had tipping in the full service restaurants for a long time. Our quick service restaurants, we've had tipping there just over 3 years now, but they're a little bit different than just a regular fast food restaurant. They're more like what you'd call a fast casual restaurant. You do place your order with the cashier, but the service doesn't stop once the guest leaves the register. Our employees deliver the food to their table. They check back on the guests. The employees help with anything else that the guests need, and they'll bus the table when the guests are finished. So there's still a hospitality component, even though the guests initially ordered at the counter. And we feel like we feel like the guests are okay with that. They have continued to reward our employees with tipping, and so we're not seeing any signs of it. And I think what's really important is that it remains the guest's choice. We don't want anyone feeling like the cashier is staring right at them, waiting for them. What button are they going to press? And and that we don't want the guests to feel like they're going to receive a different level of service depending on what level of tipping they select. So also it's important the guests or the employees have some responsibility to earn that tip too. So the solution, I think, to tip fatigue isn't necessarily taking away the opportunity to tip, but it's making sure that the level of the service that we provide or our employees provide makes that request feel reasonable. So,
absolutely, that was a great answer. All right, Patrick, this one's for you as well. There's been a lot of noise about restaurants going no tip or all in on service charges. For those who tried it or looked closely, what actually happened and what did it cost you in staff or guest reaction?
Well, we tried it once 11 years ago. We tried it in 2 of our full service restaurants, Ivar's Acres of Clams and Ivar's Salmon House. We didn't add a service charge. We increased our prices to cover additional pay that was going to go to all of the staff at the restaurants. And we took the tip line off the bill, and we had a lot of messaging. There were stories about it in the newspaper. We were the first one around here kind of that was trying it. And again, no service charge, no auto gratuity or anything like that. Just increase the prices and you no longer have to tip at these 2 restaurants. And it was the server would mention it. It was on the bill. There were signs. It was well messaged to everybody, trying to explain what was going on. And for the most part, the employees were okay with it. We didn't have a mass defection. They didn't go running across the street to work at another restaurant. We lost some employees. Some of them didn't feel it was the right thing for them, and so they did leave. But for the most part, the employees were fine. The people who hated it were the guests. They did not like it. Almost immediately, as Kirk was saying, they immediately decided the level of service had just gone in the toilet. It was terrible. Everything's going downhill. Ivar would be rolling over in his grave if he knew how terrible the service was. Blah 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 blah. And we got, they had no control, as Kirk was saying. We got emails like, I'm an American, and as an American, I should be able to decide how much I want to tip, and blah, 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 blah. And so it didn't go well from the guest side at all, even with all the messaging that we tried. And so after about 1.5 years, we quietly reverted back to the old way. And so that was our one and only experiment. I can't imagine we'll ever try it again, at least as long as those of us who remember it are still here, because it did not go well at all. So there you go. That's my story.
Lukas, do you have any perspective on this as well?
I'm afraid we have tried to learn from the experiences of others. And to my knowledge, and definitely for my duration here, there's not been an attempt to move backwards on tips. It's just something that's so deeply ingrained, and again, kind of well in theory, it's like, yeah, it's a better customer experience, and it seems to be what everyone thinks is the right thing. Again, general perception just seems to be the right thing isn't the normal thing, and that just rubs people the wrong way. So
absolutely. All right. So Lukas, going right back to you, what do your employees actually want when it comes to tips? Has transparency or faster access to earnings become a bigger conversation with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this was kind of the very first thing I went over, but it's speed. It really is speed. This is someone's earnings. It's what goes into paying their bills, their education, their rent. It's really optimizing how long it takes from the moment someone clocks out from their shift to that deposit hitting their accounts. And despite our position in the direct model, it doesn't give us a lot of opportunities. We basically have to work with our system providers and to see what the best opportunities we have to improve that are. And I will say that one of the nice things about being a company of our scale is that we can start to try and help build those relationships between our providers on the tip front and the financial front to see if the institutions are willing to give us some sort of better, to give our providers some sort of fast track options, more immediate access to just kind of move the whole thing along. Because really we've seen that over the transition period, just shaving down hours makes a difference. People are very stressed. We've definitely seen significant improvements since we had to make our sudden shift. We've seen improvements from people messaging the head office to be like, what's going on? Why is it taking this long, etc. It's very few and far between now. It's on an exceptional basis that people reach out to us even after we've shaved down like 10, 12 hours, kind of down to a day even kind of thing. And it's huge. So it really is speed. So it's working with the providers and seeing how we can make the technology better. It's a lot of red tape.
Absolutely. And Patrick, same to you. What are your thoughts?
Well, for us, we haven't had a significant push from our teams saying that I need my tips immediately after every shift or anything like that. In quick service, Since we set it up 3.5 years ago, they've always been paid through payroll. So they get their tips with their paycheck every 2 weeks. And it's always been set up that way. So they really don't know any different. In full service, we used to pay them, cash at the end of the night. They would, walk out with hundreds of dollars in their pocket. But it's been 14 years now, I think, since we switched to doing it through the payroll. And we haven't had a push from them either, going back to the way things were. So I think, at least from our perspective, at least our people, the thing they care about is, that the amount is right. They want to understand how the pool works, who participates, and how their share was calculated. And if somebody does come to us and say, I don't understand this number, where this number came from, we want to be able to explain, we want to be able to explain it to them. So I can certainly understand why faster access is appealing, especially for our industry. But for us, it really starts, or for us, accuracy and consistency are what we've heard from our employees are the most important things right now.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just being mindful of time. Kirk, I just have a few quick questions for you.
Sure.
Can you connect the dots for us, really? How does tip transparency and speed of payout actually move retention? And how does good look like operationally?
Yeah, I think Lukas and Patrick have made this answer very easy for me. I think they both are stressors in their own right. I think stressors accumulate. If you got a bad manager, that's an additional stressor. And eventually enough stressors compile that you will leave that restaurant and you will go your own way, right? So uncertainty about pay, not having transparency, not understanding where it's going, that's a stressor. Speed and access to those tips can be a stressor. I think, Patrick, with the ability to be in Washington, where your paycheck and your wage is so much higher typically, I think you can see a little more resilience to waiting till paycheck. A place like Texas, where I'm at, again, that $2.13 an hour that gets eaten by taxes, they're used to their paycheck being quite literally zero. Wages are just covered for taxes. They won't actually receive any money on it. So when you look at it that way, I think they're particularly tip credit-based states. You've got the facts and figures out there. I've seen higher than 70%. I'm inclined to believe the sources that are quoting about 50%, but of hospitality workers that are needing to take either short-term loans or buy now, pay later, or family loans or anything in that to bridge some short-term financial gaps. And part two of that question was, what does good look like? Good, very simple. Providing transparency and speed consistently to your employees, while, if you can and you should, removing any headaches, any manual entry, any opportunity for errors or, God forbid, fraud, which we see from operators time to time. And I think you just want to look at every role that's touched by tips. There's the frontline earners. There's the people actually earning the tips and who's getting shared with. But then payroll, HR, operations, etc. So many teams on there. And the goal should be very simple, that if your role interacts with tips, you should get better or equal at minimum visibility and transparency to it, but it should be automated. It should be something that you're not having to take regular recurring action. Maybe it's a review where you need to spend a couple of minutes, but I think Lukas mentioned taking payroll times from a day, calculating things down to X number of hours is great. Ideally, from our end, we'd like to see it brought down to minutes and automate the entire piece. Good visibility, good decision-making opportunities for those people, and turn them into, someone to be proactive with tips instead of just a number pusher into an Excel sheet where you're hoping to get it right to avoid legal issues.
Absolutely. And you mentioned automation and manual process. What's the realistic first step for an operator still on spreadsheets who wants to get there without blowing up their payroll process?
Second part of that question is important. Don't blow it up. You'll make a lot of customers and employees frustrated. I know Canada, as Lukas has alluded to, I think I know the vendor you're talking about with it, that made a stumble there and really upset a number of folks. But start with transparency and visibility. I think keep your existing solution, find an automated solution like TipHaus or something else with it, and watch how it compares. It should match your existing spreadsheet automatically. And instead of you taking 12 hours to assemble it, it should be doing it in the background while notifying the important people at the important times. most importantly with that is those employees, making sure they understand their tip earnings, how they got there, and they're seeing that reward from it. Time savings is great, but the trust with the team is what a lot of people don't see. And I think, Lukas, you actually put a great point on it, that the emails to corporate started to drop down as you solve some of those problems. And we get lost forgetting that, managers get a ton of questions, and employee morale matters, and that matters for the service. And so as those are improving, you're on the right path. I think that only takes a week or two working with them, your existing system and an automated system. Once you see that, then it's up to you to layer on something like ours is proprietary earned tip access, where we're partnered with FDIC insured banks. We're a card issuer through MasterCard as well. Like, we give employees options on how to receive their tips. But realistically, as long as you take care of that first step, confirm the accuracy for your side, confirm the time savings, and then layer on. You're going to build the employee trust as you go. And with that entire piece, you start to get employees associating these hard works, these shifts. If I worked a double and I made $400, it's nice to associate that, whether at real-time payment or, as Patrick mentioned, just the knowledge of that. But it's weird to get, 8 shifts, 10 shifts into a pay period. You don't have any access to what you earned along the way. And you say, yeah, this tips that I got on my paycheck were $1,200, but you don't remember you got $400 from that double that, really, ground you down. It was pretty tough. And that light shift, only earned you $50, but you got to sit in the back and chat with your coworkers. It was slow. Those help to paint why we're at this work. The hard days, the hard work we're putting in leads to more money. And so all of that kind of conspires into it, Cindy.
Absolutely. I want to leave some questions. We have amazing questions from the audience, just hanging out. But I have one last question. Quick question. Maybe we can answer it in about a minute. Each, Lukas and Patrick, we're going to start off with Lukas. If you were talking to a multi-unit operator still running tips through spreadsheets, what's the one thing you'd tell them based on what you'd seen?
So to try and keep this as short as possible, I'll say I hope you have a technical expert to make it real-time reportable, a financial specialist to make sure it's being done correctly, and then someone on the governance side to keep it all aligned from the regulatory side. And if those 3 people happen to be one person, they probably deserve a raise. So the real message here, to paraphrase Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, just because your organization thoughts were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. So yeah, spreadsheets are doable, but I'm going to go side with Kirk on this one and say they are a temporary solution to a permanent problem. And if you really need that auditing capability, the ability to the oversight, the speed, it's got to be automated. It's got to be reportable, and it's spreadsheets are realistically a temporary solution.
Absolutely. What about you, Patrick?
I think if you have a very small operation, like one location and a few employees, and the only person who touches the spreadsheet is Steve, and nobody but Steve touches it, and Steve knows everything, great. But once you start growing, and once you start adding restaurants and adding employees and different position and ad rates and hours and tip pools and all these other things, you are introducing so many opportunities for human error. The more fingers you get in there and start touching the spreadsheets, and somebody changes a formula, or somebody copies the wrong number, or this happened to us the other day. Somebody was working from an old version of a file. Any of those things can happen so easily, and you don't realize it's going on. And then you screw up the tips, and somebody gets the wrong amount. And that's really important here in Washington, because we have very strict wage transparency laws. We have to get it right, and if we don't get it right, then we have all kinds of agencies like the Seattle Office of Labor Standards or Department of Labor and Industries that will come investigate you and audit you and do all these things. And so it's really important that you get it right. And so I wouldn't say just move away from spreadsheets because it saves time, or because the automation saves time. I would say do it because because you want consistency, and you want an audit trail, and you want to be able to answer, if an employee does come to you and say, how did you get this number? How did I earn this amount of tips? You can say, here, let me show you. And it's very easy to show them exactly how they got to that number. So that would be my answer.
That's a great answer, Patrick. For everyone who joined us today, thank you for spending your day with us, or part of your day with us, and participating in the live chat. Just as a reminder, today's recording of the webinar will be shared to all attendees tomorrow. If you missed anything or want to revisit the discussion or would like to share it with your team, you'll have the ability to come back and rewatch it. Thank you so much, TipHaus, and our panelists, and everyone who joined us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.